Так.
I hope you feel well.
Good morning. Could I remind all members who are connected via remote system? Could I remind all members who are connected via remote system that they are connected using their correct email address, which has been registered and validated by them earlier within our database. Please connect yourself with correct email address. If you do not do that, you will have no voting rights during the sitting. You will be not able to vote. I repeat, check whether you have been connected with correct email address previously registered and validated by you in our database in order that you could have access to voting during this sitting and subsequently during all further sittings and committee meetings.
Ladies and gentlemen, the sitting is open. I declare open the first part of the 2021 ordinary session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, the year 2020 was the most difficult year for our Assembly, out of all the 22 years I spent here. The COVID-19 pandemic posed enormous challenges to our organization. I wish to thank all of you for facing these challenges with dignity. Particular tribute should be paid to our Secretariat, led by tireless Secretary General Wojciech Sawicki, for its professional, dedicated, and creative efforts to keep the Assembly working. The Council of Europe in general and our Assembly in particular substantially contributed to upholding European standards during the pandemic. We adopted a number of essential resolutions, recommendations, and guidelines aimed at strengthening democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, especially with regard to justifications for and limitations on the restrictions placed on citizens' rights under the European Convention of Human Rights in order to fight the pandemic. The pandemic disproportionately affected vulnerable groups: women, the elderly, people with low income, LGBT, asylum seekers and migrants, and national minorities. In some member states, vulnerable groups are scapegoated, and attempts are made to deepen their exclusion and alienation, in particular with regard to LGBT persons and national minorities. We should reinforce our efforts to protect these groups and resolutely combat any attempts to justify discrimination, in particular under the pretext of anti-pandemic measures. The current crisis highlighted deeply rooted prejudice and stereotypes in our societies. It spawned new populist groups in Europe and provided existing ones with new slogans and conspiracy theories, such as COVID deniers or anti-vaxxers. Such new populists may well succeed in entering parliaments and therefore may appear in our Assembly too. We must be prepared to face also this challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that even and especially under the circumstances of growing tension, deprivation, and despair Our Assembly must continue to fulfill its mission of a watchdog for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law everywhere in Europe. This should include, sooner rather than later, Belarus, whose brave people are challenging their authoritarian regime. A famous German philosopher said, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." As we see today, the ominous virus failed to kill our Assembly. Let's work together to make it stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, the first item on the agenda is the examination of credentials of members for the 2021 ordinary session of the Assembly. This year, given the circumstances, the deadline for submission of the credentials was midnight on Monday, 18th January. The names of the representatives and substitutes are in document 15215, which is available both in the hemicycle and on extranet. If no credentials are challenged, the credentials will be ratified. Are any credentials challenged? If so, please ask for the floor by raising your hand for those present in the chamber or via the CUDA system. So first, I would like the Secretariat if someone is asking for the floor in the hemicycle.
Yes, Mr. President, Madam Mezentseva from Ukraine is asking for the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. So before calling a member to speak at this point, I remind the Assembly that the rules on challenging the credentials require the member challenging credentials to state first which credentials are being challenged, so which delegations, whether the challenge is under Rule 7, procedural grounds, or Rule 8, substantive grounds, and the reasons for the challenge. So, Madam Mezentseva, the floor is yours, please.
Dear Chair, thank you very much, dear Chair. Mr. Chairman, in 2019, the Assembly welcomed back the Russian delegation in order to relaunch a political dialogue with the only objective to better protect Russian people. On the contrary, the Russian authorities persistently continue to shrink political and civil liberties. The targeted campaign against the leader of the opposition and thousands of Russian citizens confirm the conclusions of the Court of Human Rights that the aim of the ongoing political process is to suppress the political pluralism and therefore effective diplomacy, which is the central value of this organization. Russia's continued repressions on human rights violations in the occupied territories in violating of many PACE resolutions, namely 1990, 2034, 2063, 2132, in which the Assembly condemned the grave violations of international law committed by the Russian Federation with regard to legal annexation of Crimea, military-occupied Donbass, Resolution 2261. The Russian Federation maintains amendments to Article 79 of the Russian Constitution, which allow not to comply with the decisions of the bodies established by the international treaty. The mere argument that Russia continues to monitor in dialogue is not enough. A country engaged in such dialogue obliged to refrain from acts. On today, we witness the total ignorance subvention which requires strong answer from Assembly in the name of citizens from 2019. Finally, the fact that Russian delegation includes members elected in the constituency which includes illegal annexed territories, constituencies additionally compelling indicator, Article 3 of the statute. And I'm finishing. On behalf of my colleagues, I challenge before the credentials of Russian Federation delegation on substantive grounds under Rule 8, account of serious violations of Article 3 of the preamble of the statute, as well as to Russia's failure to honor its obligation and commitments. Sorry for a delay in my speech. Thank you, dear Chair.
Thank you, Madam Mezentseva. Colleagues, please try to be brief and to respect the rules, including the limits to speaking time. So, Mrs. Mezentseva is challenging the credentials of the delegation of Russian Federation on substantive grounds under Rule 8 of the Assembly's Rules of Procedure. Under Rule 8, your challenge must be supported by at least 30 members from at least 5 national delegations. Under the changes to our rules introduced in November 2020 by Resolution 2349, I will invite those who support this challenge to indicate their support using the available voting system. Members present in the chamber should stand in their place and use the voting system of the hemicycle by voting yes. So please stand up and also vote. Members who do not support the challenge shall not vote at all. Members participating remotely should vote using the CUDA system. Those who support this challenge will vote yes. Those who do not support the challenge shall not vote at all. So now the vote in the hemicycle and via CUDA is now open. So 10 more seconds. So colleagues, I hope that everybody has clarity with regard to how to handle this rather complicated combined voting system. So the vote is closed and I ask for the results to be displayed.
The results will be displayed in a few moments. We have to combine results of vote in the hemicycle and the vote which were delivered via CUDA voting system.
Yes, I see that in CUDA we have 26 votes, right? And how many votes in the hemicycle? It's not available to me, so I'm waiting for the secretariat to calculate all the votes and also to check whether the members who supported the challenge belong to at least 5 different national delegations.
This is coming soon. Well, I can tell you now, before it is published, that the combined results of the vote from both systems is 38 members who supported the request, 26 via CUDA and 12 from the hemicycle, and members who voted belong to more than 5 parliamentary delegations.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. So the challenge has the support required under the rules of procedure. The credentials of the Russian Federation delegation are referred without debate to the appropriate committee for a report and to the Committee on Rules of Procedure, Immunities and Institutional Affairs for opinion. I propose the appropriate committee in this case is the monitoring committee because the challenge was motivated with fulfillment of obligations and commitments undertaken before the Council of Europe. So are there any objections to the proposals that appropriate committee in this case is the monitoring committee? I see no one asking for the floor, so this is approved. So the committee shall report back to the Assembly within 24 hours if possible. So this is agreed to. Accordingly, the credentials of the Russian delegation are referred to the monitoring committee for report and to the Committee on Rules of Procedure for opinion. The President will make proposals for the examination by the Assembly of the committee's report when we consider the draft agenda. I remind you that members of a national delegation whose credentials are challenged may sit provisionally with the same rights as other assembly members until the assembly has reached a decision. However, those members shall not vote in any proceedings relating to the examination of credentials which concern them. Are there any further challenges? I don't see in the hemicycle. I don't see in CUDA. So I conclude that other challenge credentials set out in document 15.1.215 are ratified, and I welcome our new colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item on the agenda is the election of the President of the Assembly, as set out in document you received as INF 2021-03. I have received only one candidature, that of Mr. Rick Dems from Belgium, incumbent President of our Assembly. I therefore declare Mr. Rick Dems elected President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe for this ordinary session. Congratulations, Mr. Dems. Rick, I welcome you to the chair.
Voilà, chers collègues, vous toutes et tous, grand merci de votre confiance. Une des plus dures élections que j'ai connues dans toute ma carrière. Grand merci. Permettez-moi de vous dire que l'année passée, je vous ai confié que je serai à votre disposition à temps plein. Parole donnée, parole tenue. Je m'engage cette fois de nouveau à être votre service à temps plein, parce que je crois qu'il est plus que nécessaire. Ce n'est pas facile, mais il faut ce qu'il faut. Permettez-moi ensuite, à mon tour, de vous souhaiter toutes et tous, Madame la Secrétaire Générale, Madame la Secrétaire Générale adjointe, ceux qui sont branchés par vidéo, le Comité des ministres, tous ceux qui nous suivent, les collègues ailleurs, les collègues ici, de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à la première plénière session de l'an, tout en sachant que c'est la première session plénière depuis un an. Ceci m'a fait faire une sorte de réflexion, car il y a un ancien collègue à moi qui a été au Parlement plus de 50 ans, 5-0, toujours élu sur ses propres voies de préférence. Je peux vous dire qu'on a essayé de l'écarter, mais ce n'était pas possible. Plus de 50 ans. Et un jour, il me disait, Eric, la politique, c'est savoir faire, mais surtout faire savoir. Et donc, est-ce que nous avons su faire? Eh bien oui, je le crois. Nous avons développé, Madame la Secrétaire Générale, le trilogue avec le Comité des ministres, afin de coordonner, synchroniser où nécessaire nos actions. Nous avons adapté, modifié, surmonté les règles pour que nous puissions travailler et effectivement avoir des résultats. Nous avons abordé le Covid par des rapports qui ont en partie substantiellement aidé le Comité de ministres de confectionner la déclaration d'Athènes que nous avons repris nous-mêmes à bord, qui affirmait notre adhérence à nos valeurs et surtout qui tirait les lignes rouges dans lesquelles il faut rester pour effectivement protéger toutes nos valeurs et pour que nous ne tombions pas dans le piège d'un nouveau normal. Oui, nous avons changé notre méthode de travail vers une sorte de travail thématique qui nous a permis de livré de la substance sur l'intelligence artificielle au comité des ministres et je salue la présidence allemande qui a fait de sorte qu'aujourd'hui, on est en train de travailler effectivement sur un set de standards liantes et non liantes concernant l'intelligence artificielle. Et oui, nous avons vu l'émergence d'une nouvelle génération de droits. Par exemple, le fait qu'aujourd'hui, sous le drapeau de la libre expression, on croit qu'on peut mentir, bien que le droit de connaître la vérité est important. Et oui, nous avons vu une fois de plus l'émergence et l'urgence de l'environnement connecté aux droits humains. Sachons qu'il y a déjà 12 ans, cette Assemblée a rendu une recommandation au comité des ministres de confectionner un protocole. Et donc oui, nous avons su faire. Et je voudrais m'associer aux remerciements de Boris, à dire merci et chapeau à notre équipe de l'Assemblée, plus de 80 personnes sous la direction éminemment professionnelle du secrétaire général, qui ont fait de sorte que tout ça était possible. Et je voudrais aussi dire merci et chapeau à toutes et tous, collègues parlementaires qui ont travaillé pendant cette année difficile, nos vice-présidents qui m'ont quand même aidé beaucoup, à nos chefs de délégation qui ont poussé leurs membres d'être actifs, à nos chefs de groupe qui l'ont fait, à tous les gens qui sont autour, et surtout à nos présidents de commission qui ont fait de sorte que, oui, nous avons su faire. Mais qu'en est-il du faire savoir? Qu'en est-il du faire savoir? Ne soyons pas naïfs. L'année 2020 a été en partie une année perdue sur ce point. C'est vrai. Le savoir-faire qui est important, mais le faire savoir qui est encore plus important pour que tout ce que nous faisons soit engrangé dans nos sociétés au bénéfice de plus de 430 millions de citoyens dans 47 pays. Et donc, mis à part de la route 47 virtuelle qui fonctionne bien, nous n'avons pas su nous connecter physiquement. En partie, nous le ferons aujourd'hui. Nous n'avons pas su le faire. Et donc, cet élément très important, nous n'avons pas vécu. Nous ne l'avons pas vécu, malheureusement. Et oui, nos moniteurs n'ont pas été sur place. Et oui, nos observateurs n'ont guèrement pu observer. Et non, nos rapporteurs n'ont pas été dans les pays pour effectivement faire leur rapport. Donc, une année en partie perdue. Mais ne perdons pas le courage et ni la motivation de continuer, vu déjà aujourd'hui en partie la présence de certains collègues. And it also made me think of maybe a very strange reflection, but it came to my mind that trees don't meet, but people do. Trees stand separate to each other, and people interconnect. And this is the difference between what we have lived in part in 2020 and what we are trying to reconnect with as of today. Interconnect people. And yes, in part, we stood separate from each other, and this has not been the best way to work. Because you need to meet in order to convince your colleague or to be convinced by your colleague, obviously. And this gives me the following thought, that taking on board the perspectives and the proposals and the ideas and the opinions of your colleagues, taking them on board is very hard, if not impossible, if you do not meet in person. And so we lose, in part, perspective, which, by the way, in all of our work has been lost anyway. And let me show that with a very small example. What we have seen in the political world in the past, and we'll see it in the future, but still, if it might be some kind of a guideline, I will try to do it with the help of a simple glass. Because being in our country, we were rather perspectiveless. Now, if you look at the glass like that, it's like a rectangle. But then if you look at the glass like that, it's a circle. And even if you look at it like that, it is a closed circle. Now, why am I saying that? Because so often we have seen colleagues debating, arguing fighting over the fact, no, it's a rectangle, no, it's a circle, no, it's a closed circle. But hey, it is the same glass. It is just the way and the perspective you use to look at it. And if the aim is to fill the glass, well, then we should take on board the perspective of our colleagues and take into account those things that we do not master, such as gravity, in order taking all the perspectives on board, to be able to know that we have to keep and put the glass upward in order for it to be able to contain water. May sound strange to put it that way, but still, if we do not interconnect and if we are not able to take on board the perspectives, the opinions of each and every one on an equal basis even, and then make up our minds, we will not be able to really conclude in a good way. And so the next question that arises is about why are we doing all of this? Why are we all making this effort? My brother, with whom I've got some connection through WhatsApp because I cannot meet him, he said, Rick, but why are you doing all that? Well, the answer is simple, colleagues. At least it is simple for me. It is because we care. It is because we, members of this assembly, we care about the fact that people are equal. Being equal is not being the same. This is why we are united in diversity. It is because we care about human rights to be enjoyed by all of the citizens in the 47 countries. It is because we care that people must be free to enjoy and to be able to pursue their happiness. It is because we are caring about the fact that no one should be above the law. That's what rule of law is all about. Because we think, we care, we need to have the people to decide. Parliaments should be on board. That's called democracy. Equality, human rights, freedoms, rule of law, democracy, the cornerstones of what we do. This is why. Why? Because we care and should go on caring even more than yesterday. And so, what does it mean? It means that, for me at least, and I hope for all of us, it means that principles go over policies. It means that our common values are more important than our interests. And if I make an analogy to one of the well-known expressions of an American president, I would say, ask not what the Council of Europe can do for your interests, but ask what you should do to defend, uphold the principles and the values that we share and cherish. So ask not and stop to see the Council of Europe as a platform for the pursuance of interests, but look at this assembly as the vehicle of defending and upholding the values that we share. And so, in resume, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which to me is the Council of the Europeans, that's our name. The upholding and defending and the protecting of human rights, as enshrined in the European Convention of Human Rights, that is our trade. And the fact that not pursuing the ideal world, but trying to make the world better, if we have the courage to do so, that is our goal. Thank you very much. Let's go to work. Let's reboot. Now, the next item on the agenda is the election of vice presidents of the Assembly. By the way, I can assure you that you can work with your mask on. It's even an FPP2, so it goes well. And I didn't have any remarks from the interpreters, so it seems to work well. Colleagues, we've got 17 nominations for vice presidents. They are listed in document AS-INF 2021-01. Is there a request to vote? Wojciech? Colleagues? I don't see any. Since there has not been a request to vote, I declare these candidates elected as vice presidents of the Assembly. In accordance with Rule 16 of the Rules of Procedure, they will take precedence of age. Who is the oldest one? Wojciech, you don't know? Okay, we'll know later. I always have these questions to Wojciech. 16? Okay, then we go to, because we have to be prepared for everything. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the appointment of members of committees. The candidatures for the general committees of the Assembly have been published as Commission's 2021-01 and Addendum 1. Are these proposals approved? If not, any remarks, please ask for the floor, be it in the hemicycle or through Kudo. I don't see any. Then, therefore, they are accepted. Colleagues, then we come to the proposals for current and urgent debates. Before we examine the draft agenda, the Assembly needs to consider requests for debates on the urgent and current affairs procedures. The Bureau has received a lot of requests. A request for under urgent debate concerning Mr. Navalny, a request for urgent debate under Belarus, a request for current debate on prohibition of Russian minorities language in Ukraine, a request for current affairs debate on unjustified delay in repatriation of Armenian prisoners of war, a request for current debate on the actual situation in the temporary occupied autonomous Republic of Crimea, a request for current debate on the arrest and detention of Navalny, so we got urgent and current, and a request for a current debate on freedom of expression under threat by big companies. Under Resolution 2350, the Assembly may now hold up to 2 current affairs debates in part sessions. I can inform you of the fact that the Bureau was in favor and advises of holding 2 current affair debates. One being a request for a current affairs debate on the arrest and detention of Alexei Navalny, and second, a request for a current affairs debate on freedom of expression, Article 10 of the ECHR, on the threat by big tech companies. Do we agree, or do we have... Oh, the Bureau rejected all the other requests for debate. So just to be clear, we had 7 or 8 requests, and the Bureau advises to hold 2 current affairs debates on, one Navalny and the other freedom of expression, big tech. So we will take them one by one. We will first consider the request for debates under the urgent procedure. At its meeting on the Friday of the Bureau, it agreed to recommend to the Assembly that a request for a debate under urgent procedure concerning the arrest and detention of Alexei Navalny would be rejected. The Bureau was, however, in favor of having a current affairs debate on the same topic. So, is the Bureau's recommendation accepted? If not, I ask you to ask for the floor. No one in the room. And I have Mr. Zingeris through Kodo. Mr. Zingeris, you have the floor.
Yes, dear colleagues and friends, especially Rick's congratulations with usual elections. Thank you for chairing us and chairing us in so smoothly way. I would like to tell you that is new. The events happened from Friday in Russia. We have 3,500 arrested people, detained, and we need to have at least a resolution in sight of our urgent debate. So the Bureau, when you just discussed on Friday, have no new evidences of Saturday event when thousands of people were arrested, and we should say simply in resolution of urgent debate, let's Navalny go from prison, let's be free, let's free him. And free all other political prisoners. For that reason, and having in mind that Committee on Human Rights, where mostly of us were present, voted in favor for urgent debate, I would like to encourage you to have a vote for urgent debate. Well, it's exceptional case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zingeris. I would appreciate everyone to stay within the time limit, which you almost did. Great. We now give the floor only to one person to oppose the opinion of Mr. Zingeris, who wishes an urgent debate. Je vois que Madame de Courson demande la parole. Madame de Courson. What do we vote on? Okay, Madame de Courson is trying to get on board. Here we go. Okay, that is something else. C'est un peu bizarre. C'était presque la chaise vide. Hein? Is anyone else wishes to speak? I see that Mr. Cox, you have the floor. We can only have one speaker for the opposing opinion.
We should stick to the decision, the proposal made by the Bureau with a large majority, because we already are making a report on the Navalny case by our colleague Jacques Mayer, and it doesn't make sense to make another one on this issue. So I ask the colleagues to follow the proposal to have a current affairs debate this week and give our colleague Jacques Mayer a decent chance to finish his report, and then we come back to that in this assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As you know, only one speaker in favor and against are allowed. The Bureau was against having the urgent debate. We shall now vote on the request for urgent debate. This decision requires a 2/3 majority. So just to be clear, the Bureau was not in favor, and so this vote is about having the urgent debate. So those who want the urgent debate vote yes, and the other ones vote no. Vote is open. Please vote. Vote closed. Results, please. I do abide, hope on your patience, because, combining the votes takes a little bit more time.
Mr. President, while waiting for the results to be displayed, I can give you that what's going to be published soon. Numbers of members voting in favor together by both voting systems is 56. Number of members who voted against is 88, and number of those who abstained is 6.
Okay, so then the proposal for an urgent debate is rejected. Okay, I have to go through my pages. Okay, then, okay, which page? Because this is a lot. Okay. Okay, then we come to the next one. At its meeting on Friday, the Bureau agreed to recommend to the Assembly that a request for a debate on the urgent debate on the worsening situation in Belarus be rejected. I recall that basically the Bureau advised for 2 current affairs debate. Does anyone wish to have this put to the vote? I don't see it, then it is not on the table anymore. Okay, which page do we go now? Thank you. Then, before we examine the draft agenda, the Assembly needs to consider the request for current affairs debate. I remind the Assembly that under Resolution 2350, the Assembly may now hold up to only 2 current affairs debates in a part session. We first come to a request for a current affairs debate on the arrest and detention of Alexei Navalny. At its meeting on Friday, the Bureau unanimously approved this request and therefore recommends to the Assembly that the matter be debated during this part session. Does the Assembly agree to this recommendation? I see someone asking for the floor. I don't know whether it's Mr. Klich, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to refer to the point concerning the situation in Belarus, being disappointed, not only myself, but also several colleagues from Central and Eastern Europe, as far as I know, disappointed that this proposal was rejected. We have the dramatic situation in Belarus. We have several persons murdered. We have several persons tortured and many Belarusians detained and arrested. I am pretty sure that the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly should devote its time to that issue right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kirsch. Do you ask for a vote? I mean, normally we have passed this point, so this is a reminder to each and every one of you to ask for the floor in time. Do you request a vote on the issue? Because that will take us obviously back to the point before. I don't hear you, Mr. Kirsch. Mr. Kirsch, please open your mic.
Yes, Mr. President, I ask for voting. I'm so sorry to be a little bit late, but I tried to be on time, but I was not allowed to speak. Thank you so much. I request for voting.
Thank you very much. It's going to take a bit of time. Does anyone wish to speak against having an urgent debate on Belarus? I have Mr. Cox again. Mr. Cox. Mike.
No. Okay, it functions. I fully agree, Mr. President, with what Mr. Klich said, that the situation in Belarus is very worrying. And that's the reason that this Assembly already decided to draft 2 reports on the situation in Belarus. They are under preparation. And I think that is the best way we serve the interests of the citizens of Belarus, to go in depth in these 2 issues and then come up with a clear resolution in order to protect those who are in favor of democracy in Belarus, instead of having now an urgent debate. We already have 2 reports under preparation, so I would suggest to follow the proposal of the Bureau, not to have this urgent debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cox. I recall the colleagues that the Bureau decided to propose to the Assembly to have 2 current affairs debates, and so by consequence is against this urgent affair debate. I will put this now to the vote. Those who vote in favor wish to have the urgent affair debate. Those who vote against do not. In order for it to prevail, it needs a 2/3 majority. The vote is open. Vote is closed. Result, Mr. Secretary General.
Mr. President, the results are the following. 46 members voted in favor, 93 voted against, and there are 14 abstentions.
So then the urgent affairs debate request is declined. We now come to the current affairs debates. First one is the current affairs debate on the arrest and detention of Alexei Navalny. The Bureau was in favor of this current affairs debate. Anyone wishes to have the floor? Thank you. Then the current affairs debate is approved. The Bureau's recommendation is accepted, and the request for a current affairs debate is therefore approved. The debate will be opened by Jacques Maire. Then we have the next current affairs debate, which is a request on freedom of expression under threat by big tech companies. At its meeting on Friday, the Bureau approved this request and therefore recommends to the Assembly that the matter be debated during this first part session. Does the Assembly agree to this recommendation? The Bureau recommends to hold this debate. No one asks for the floor. It therefore is accepted, and the request for a current affairs debate is therefore approved. Bob de Brabander will open the debate. Okay, so yeah, since we have two current affairs debates, we do not have any other current affairs debate to be possible. Okay, then. Okay, let me go to the adoption of the agenda. The next item of business is the next item of business is the adoption of the agenda for the first part of the 2021 ordinary session. The draft agenda submitted to the Assembly's approval was drawn up by the Bureau on December 9th and updated last Friday. We decided on the debates. Now, as a challenge to the credentials of the delegation of the Russian Federation has been successfully done, we will need to make some changes to the agenda to allow time for a report on that challenge to be debated. What I would propose, after consulting obviously our Secretary General, would be the following. The debate on post-monitoring dialogue with Montenegro planned for Wednesday afternoon will be postponed and will not be debated in this part session. This is the consequence, obviously. The current affairs debate on Navalny will take place at 4 p.m. on Wednesday as the first item of business. The debate on the challenge of credentials of the Russian delegation will take place on Thursday morning as the first item at 9 o'clock. And the current affairs debate on freedom of expression will take place on Thursday morning as the second item of business at 10 a.m., which then will be followed by the debate on ethnic profiling in Europe, a matter of great concern. In addition to these changes, I would like to propose, again, in concurrence with our Secretary General, that we extend the sitting on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday by half an hour to 7:30. I hope that will work because, as you see, we do lose a little bit of time on the voting, and that we are therefore able to increase the number of speakers in debates in the draft agenda as amended. Do we have an agreement on these changes of the agenda? I suppose so. I see Mr. Tolstoy. You have the floor, Mr. Tolstoy, from the hemicycle.
Уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемые коллеги, в связи со срочностью вопроса я предлагаю дебаты по пункту о свободе выражения мнений и роли крупных компаний перенести в среду. Будет больше членов ассамблеи здесь. И мне кажется, что это тема, которая касается всех. А дебаты по Навальному провести в четверг после дискуссии по полномочиям. Спасибо.
Mr. Goncharenko, you have the floor against.
President, thank you everybody, and hello to everybody. I just want to say that it's extremely important to have a debate on Navalny case on Wednesday, as early as possible, because what is going on in Russian Federation now, it's absolute Stalinism, it's terror against its own citizens, again, Novichok against the leader of opposition, chemical weapon, detain illegal of a person, hundreds beaten, thousands arrested, and we cannot wait till even Thursday. The earlier, the better. So I would like to ask everybody to support the proposition of Mr. President to have a debate on Navalny on Wednesday, because that's extremely important question now. Thank you very much.
Okay, in order to make this simple, I have heard the proposal of colleague Tolstoy. I've heard the objection of our other colleague. So I put to the vote the agenda as I propose it. And those who vote yes will agree with my proposal. Those who vote no would agree with the proposal of our colleague, Mr. Tolstoy. The vote is open. So yes is on the proposal as I explained. No would be in favor of the proposal of our colleague, Mr. Tolstoy. Vote is closed. Results, Mr. Secretary General.
Mr. President, the result is the following. 104 members voted in favor, 27 voted against, and there are 15 abstentions.
Thank you very much. Therefore, the agenda as proposed by myself has been accepted. Let's now go to the next point of order, the adoption of the minutes of proceedings of the Standing Committee. The minutes of the meeting of the Standing Committee in Strasbourg on December 4, 2020 have been distributed. I invite the Assembly to take note of these minutes. I see a request for the floor. Madam Kovacs, you have the floor.
No,
okay. I see that this has been withdrawn, so the Assembly takes note of the minutes. Now, the next item on the agenda is the debate on the progress report of the Bureau and Standing Committee, which is document 15213 and addendum 1 and 2, to be presented by Mr. Ian Littlegranger. This will be combined with consideration of the report of the ad hoc committee of the Bureau on the observation of the early parliamentary elections in Georgia on October 31st, 2020, document 15210, presented by Mr. Tini Cox. Now, I inform you that the debate must be concluded by 1 p.m. 1:30, so we also extended that one. Okay, so it must be concluded by 1:30. And now I call Mr. Littlegranger to present the progress report of the Bureau and Standing Committee. You have no more than 10 minutes to present the report and no more than 3 minutes to reply to the debate. Mr. Littlegranger, I don't see you. You have to ask for the floor. I see you did, Mr. Ian Littlegranger. Ian Littlegranger, you have the floor. 10 minutes max.
Thank you, Mr. President. 10 minutes max it will be. And can I first of all thank you for your speech to start with? You mentioned a very important thing. You mentioned honesty. And that is the watchword not only for all politicians, but for all democracies. And that is something we should all learn. We've got a lot to do. The title of this report suggests progress has been made since January last year. I'm not entirely sure about that. Nothing because of anything we've done. It's just because of the situation we are in. As you may know, the word progress in English language has a double meaning, both looking backwards and looking forward. I shall therefore concentrate more on lessons learned and than summing up a list of failures and missed chances. That can be done by historians. While being confronted with some of the unforeseen travel restrictions, our Assembly took several decisions to enable us to do at least our core activities. Attempts to proceed with the business as usual gradually ended up in disinterest by members, and I am worried there are not that many attendees regardless of being physical or virtual. I made no secret about it. I was not in favour of holding the plenary session hybrid form. And I've always supported the principle that either you can all come to Strasbourg or not. Equality of arms is an important principle enshrined in our convention. Initially, this was agreed upon as it was agreed to deal with the most necessities and the most important urgent matters, and not for the most sensitive topics. Yet the agenda of this session seems to be derived strongly from those original principles. This week will tell us if all these decisions taken by the Bureau were right or not. I do agree, however, that we have to proceed with the elections of high-ranking officials of the Council of Europe, and also, obviously, with the election of judges. In this respect, I'd like to remind our Ukrainian colleagues that the terms to propose a new candidate judge are over 2 years late, and if action doesn't seem started soon, then we could have problems. All our governments and parliaments have struggled over the past year with new working methods and civil unrest. There is also a worrying crackdown on the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, privacy, and the freedom of movement. All these rights are the core principles of the Articles of the Convention on Human Rights. And in astonishment, I take note of the fact that some countries, the limitation of these freedom of rights barely provoked a debate in Parliament and were taken by executive orders of government. If your country hasn't had a parliamentary debate yet on these limitations of freedoms, when will it happen? And then limitations should be lifted. I urge all countries to do so as soon as possible. We, the Council of Europe, should closely follow up each and every single one of you and the way that you're handling this situation, including the United Kingdom. In October last year, we took stock of how things were handled, offered lessons learned and expertise to country, so there is no excuse for authoritarian behaviour. 2020 also brought the unseen violence and woke demonstrations of the past. I have seen our collective failure in the war of Nagorno-Karabakh erupt, and we failed there. Though we have also had an open conflict between Turkey and its neighbours, and we did nothing for the people in Belarus, and are still, as far as I'm concerned, doing nothing. While Nagorno-Karabakh and Eastern Europe Mediterranean conflicts are in progress, and the finding of some sort of settlement of our neighbours in Belarus bravely keep fighting for their rights, basic rights, and against an unseen and sometimes too visual police brutality. Belarus may not be a member state, but if the Council of Europe, the oldest and respected human rights organisation actually on the planet, has no answer to the cries and begs of help from a European country, then really what is the purpose of this organisation? Having said that, I looked at the images of how many thousands of peaceful protesters were treated the past weekend in some of the cities across Russia. I most certainly this organisation needs to look at itself very carefully. We have amongst our members former ministers, even former prime ministers, former EU commissioners, and even former human rights commissioners. When I look at the experience in office and the life of the collective membership of the Assembly, the general public might look at us as the conscience of Europe. However, this does not translate in how we as an Assembly act. On behalf of members of the general public across Europe, especially we do not allow skulls to be cracked in streets of Kaliningrad or Vladivostok, and innocent people to be locked up for lengthy prison sentences. And the worst part is, we can't even blame most of the Russian authorities for it. Many colleagues were absolutely convinced in 2019 we should be allowed to allow Russia back into the pace, unconditionally. And all of this because we needed to have our bills paid. And I will remind you that the interest has still not been paid. I hope these colleagues who voted in favour of this in 2019 can live with their appalling decision, because now we're seeing the fruits of it. And there is real hypocrisy amongst some colleagues. This week shall see what practical limitations that are from June 19 decision that was made. We really can do anything about it. Having eyes, we do need to rally to impose sanctions. And I'm afraid at the moment it is the Russian delegation, but it could be others. When I look at these members of being present in Strasbourg this week, I do see in a great reverence the great-grandson of the most famous writers. We've also got members of Russian with PhDs in law, medicine, economy, constitutional experts, Olympic champions, etc. We don't really need to tell you what you need to do to demand and look after democracy. Do we need the US to tell us not to be afraid of our own people? And opposition in government is healthy. It's a democratic thing. And that judges should be allowed to make independent decisions. And these topics will not go away. I think you should realize about how many of us have a great deal of experience in the Assembly. And while you are here, make it worthwhile to accept the assistance and the know-how of people. We're not here to try and stop people doing things. We're here to try and get democracy and the organs of people's democratic rights working properly. So you're not the only country to struggle with demons. We've all done it in the past. We've all learned from this pandemic and other things that member states only pay lip service to some in democracy and human rights, and then it gets difficult. As for the Council of Europe and its assembly, every crisis there is an opportunity. Soon after summer, many things might have resumed to some sort of normality, we hoped. Let us use these months to come, however long they may be, to properly reform this organisation under whoever the new Secretary General will be, maybe it be whichever one, and the Deputy, and the judges, to make sure that we are relevant again, and to resolve and restore the trust in us by our staff and by the general public. How to be able to answer the call for help from our citizens across our countries, within the member states and within governments, and also to look after our closest neighbours who are not members. This may be one of our final opportunities to have relevance. I ask you for your indulgence because I believe strongly that we have a right to ask for these things. We are parliamentarians. We're proud parliamentarians. We all have the right to be heard. We all have the right to be listened to. And therefore, I would ask you, colleagues, to take this progress report in the spirit that it's made. It may sound critical, but I'd like to think it's there to help, to understand, and for us to move forward together as a democratic family. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Little-Granger. I now call Mr. Tini Cox to present the report of the Ad Hoc Committee of the Bureau of the Observation of the Early Parliamentary Elections in Georgia. Mr. Cox, from the floor in the hemicycle, you have 3 minutes. So, is that...
Mr. President, the parliamentary elections on the 31st of October in Georgia took place in times of COVID. This did not only limit the possibilities of the citizens and the authorities in Georgia, but also our election observation mission. We had to skip a pre-electoral visit to Georgia, could only deploy part of our delegation during the election observation, and we had first we had to postpone and later to cancel a post-electoral mission to the country. Nevertheless, Mr. President, thanks to the excellent cooperation with our international partners and thanks to the assistance given by Georgian authorities, political parties, NGOs, and media representatives, we still were able to do our work. The results of our mission you find in your files. Mr. President, the political climate in Georgia was tense before the elections, remained tense on election day, and the post-electoral period, which lasts until now. According to the International Election Observation Mission, in which we participated together with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and the experts of ODIHR, according to that International Election Observation Mission, the parliamentary elections were competitive and overall fundamental freedoms were respected. Nevertheless, pervasive allegations of pressure on voters and blurring of the line between the ruling party and the state reduced public confidence in some aspects of the process. The dominance of the ruling party in the election commissions negatively affected the perception of their impartiality and independence, especially at the lower levels. Recent legislative amendments adopted following an inclusive consultation process involving Council of Europe and ODIHR recommendations help to provide a legal framework that is as such a sound basis for holding democratic elections. Nevertheless, the State Audit Office capacity to effectively oversee the integrity of the campaign financing remained limited, leaving long-standing Council of Europe and ODIHR recommendations unaddressed. In conclusion, Mr. President, these elections were competitive and relatively free. 48 parties and 2 blocs participated in the elections, out of which 10 parties succeeded to have 1 or more representatives elected. The main problem of these elections was not the freeness, but the level of fairness. The ruling party did not respect enough the line between itself and the state while campaigning, the International Election Observation Mission concluded. The other main problem is that other parties decided to boycott participating in the new parliament, which goes counter to the very essence of elections to represent voters. Our co-rapporteurs for Georgia have already called on all these parties to accept their seats and in the parliament in order to, for the sake of Georgian democratic consolidation. I think that is a wise would like to call upon to check all complaints made to the electoral process, and then to ruling party and other parties to engage in a meaningful dialogue to overcome the problems that have risen and to come to a further electoral and judicial reform in Georgia. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. Cox, you went a bit over time, so I will subtract that during the meeting somewhere. Well, yeah, being severe is always good. Okay, we will start a debate now. As you know, we've got representatives of the political groups coming first, and then we go in the order as demanded by the members. The first on my list is Madame Petra Bayer, who will be followed by Alexander Pocic. Petra, you are in the room. Welcome. And Alex is remote. Petra, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the progress report very clearly shows that our last year's work was shadowed by COVID-19. Nevertheless, we as PACE proved that we are able to uphold democracy, to protect democratic institutions and rule of law. But we also saw that we had to diminish some of our normal tools to control democracy. For instance, many elections observations had to be cancelled. And we also saw that some governments tried to misuse the situation to diminish parliamentary power. But all in all, I think that we as PACE made it possible to show our people, our electorate, that they can trust in democracy. But of course, we also witnessed a lot of negative impact by the virus on human rights. I want to remember on the increase of domestic violence against women, or the backlash to stereotyped gender roles, where it were women mostly who combined homework, homeschooling and care, and had a double and threefold burden to care. We all know children who lack proper education, who miss the contact with their peers, and who suffer from isolation. And we also all witnessed an increase in anti-Semitism that had a fruitful ground among deniers of COVID at all, or vaccination or testing. And we also saw that some people, even some governments, blamed migrants or LGBTIQ persons to spread the virus intensely, which is of course totally crazy. But we saw really also that we have to fight for human rights in situations like that. Together, and only together, globally, we will be able to overcome this pandemic. But after that, I myself, I do not want to go back to the old normal. I do not want to go back to a society or to societies that are unequal and that are exclusive. I do not want to get back to an economic system that exhausts both nature, resources, and humans. I think we really should try to think about a restart, a totally restart, and the Sustainable Development Goals could be a hint in what direction we could move forward. But also we as Parliamentary Assembly, we have to do our homework. If you look at the last pages of the progress report, you see that there is still a very huge underrepresentation of women. And we really have to work on a system that represents and makes visible men and women, regardless of their age, regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity, regardless of their ethnic origin. And they all have to be represented here. I think it's really important. So let's try a restart together. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. On behalf of equality, I have to subtract 32 seconds from Tini in the future, and it'll be 9 in your case. So let's stick to the 3 minutes. Next on my list is Alexander Pocic, who will be followed by Madame Maria Jufereva. Alex, you have the floor remotely. Alex, if you can try to reconnect again. I don't see Alex coming on board. Okay, let's take some, try to gain some time. We now go to Maria Juferieva. Maria, you have the floor, and we will come back to Alex afterwards. Maria.
First, my best congratulations with your re-election, and dear colleagues, on behalf of all the group, I express the great concern towards the situation related to the arrest and detention of anti-corruption activist Alexei Navalny in January, the arrest of his peaceful supporters, and more generally about the socio-political developments in Russia. Therefore, we believe that Navalny case has been included to the agenda this week, and it will be. Another alarming situation is around the worsening situation in Belarus, where the authorities still continue to harass and pressure civil society activists and independent media. We also need to keep in our agenda violations against human rights and rule of law in Belarus. And finally, I will present my comments and suggestions inspired by a detailed and objective report observation of the parliamentary elections in Georgia, prepared by my colleague Tini Cox. In the report is outlined that according to the assessment of international observers, Georgia's parliamentary elections were competitive and overall fundamental freedoms were respected. First, on behalf of all the group, I call up ruling party and opposition parties launch large-scale negotiations and calculate the opportunity to work in parliament together. We see that boycott is not the best way to represent interests of population and stand for the rule of law and human rights. Second, we do not support the initiative of ruling party to withdraw budgetary fundings and other benefits from those parties which do not take up their mandates in parliament. We see that this measure could result in a worsening political situation. We all are looking forward to the evaluation of the Venice Commission in this respect. Third, we appreciate the creation of committee on investigation of violations which occurred during last elections. Fourth, we appreciate the reform of election system. In 2024, the parliamentary elections will be conducted fully on the principles of proportional system. And fifth, we suggest to implement the means of electronic elections besides of use traditional balloting system. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much. We will now come back to Alexander Pojcik. Alex, you have the floor, and you will be followed by Martin Graaf. Alex.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs les parlementaires, chers collègues. Parlant pour des problèmes techniques, moi je vais me concentrer sur le sujet des élections en Géorgie. La Géorgie a connu ces dernières années d'importantes évolutions, alors que des discussions sont en cours portant sur l'intégration économique accrue de la région sécessionniste d'Abkhazie avec la Fédération de Russie. Je voudrais réaffirmer ici notre entier soutien à l'intégralité territoriale et à la souveraineté de la Géorgie. La mise en place d'institutions solides et le bon fonctionnement du pluralisme sont les fondations indispensables d'une démocratie forte. À cet égard, le déroulement des dernières élections législatives d'octobre dernier soulève des interrogations. Les observateurs internationaux des principaux partis de l'opposition et de la société civile géorgienne et les observateurs autres, ils ont noté des insuffisances dans le déroulement de ces élections. Le groupe PPE a ainsi pris position pour exprimer sa préoccupation concernant l'arrestation de 2 candidats de l'opposition 2 semaines avant ces élections pour des motifs politiques. Notre groupe a appelé les autorités géorgiennes au respect des principes démocratiques, au bon déroulement de la campagne électorale et à des élections libres et transparentes. Des réformes électorales et judiciaires sont indispensables pour renforcer la confiance entre la population et les institutions, consolider la confiance dans les institutions publiques en Géorgie et garantir le respect de la démocratie. Le Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union européenne devraient apporter leur aide pour concrétiser ces réformes afin de consolider les institutions démocratiques de la Géorgie. Je demande de rétablir la mission post-électorale en Géorgie qui avait été décidée récemment et malheureusement a été supprimée. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Alexandre. We now turn to Mr. Martin Graaf, after whom we will have Gregorios Kadroukalos. Mr. Graaf, you have the floor.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, vorweg möchte ich mich beim Rapporteur Mr. Ian Little-Granger für die Vorlage dieses äußerst informativen Berichtes bedanken, der sicherlich geeignet ist, den Fortschritt in der Arbeit der Parlamentarischen Versammlung in den verschiedenen Politikfeldern zu beobachten. Dieser Bericht, aber auch die Diskussion darüber gibt uns und somit auch mir die Gelegenheit, auf drängende Herausforderungen der Gegenwart und der unmittelbaren Zukunft hinzuweisen. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, seit nunmehr 12 Monaten hält unsere Welt und somit auch Europa die Geisel des Covid-19-Virus samt Mutationen im wahrsten Sinne des Wortes atemberaubend in Atem. In der Bewältigung der Gesundheitskrise treten in unterschiedlichster Art und Weise massive Probleme im Umgang mit den Core Values der Parlamentarischen Versammlung zutage. Wir erleben, dass in vielen Mitgliedstaaten die Grund- und Freiheitsrechte massiv missachtet werden. So vor allem die Meinungsfreiheit, die Pressefreiheit, die Versammlungsfreiheit, die Rechtsstaatlichkeit, aber auch die Unverletzlichkeit der Privatsphäre und vieles andere mehr. Wir erleben aber auch, dass in einer unglaublichen Intensität ein Kartell einiger weniger IT-Konzerne in Zusammenarbeit mit Machtpolitikern und radikalen Vertretern der sogenannten Zivilgesellschaft nicht nur mehr bloß versuchen, sondern tatsächlich entscheiden, was noch gesagt werden darf. Früher kamen sogenannte ketzerische Bücher auf schwarze Listen. Heute kommen Meinungen auf den digitalen Scheiterhaufen von Google, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon und YouTube, um nur einige digitale Zensoren zu nennen. Zusammengefasst erleben wir gerade, dass wir Gefahr laufen, dass flächendeckend der große Verlierer unseres Jahrzehnts die Freiheit in seiner Gesamtheit ist. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, es wird eine der Hauptaufgaben der Parlamentarischen Versammlung und jedes einzelnen Mitglieds sein, in den Mitgliedstaaten einerseits genau zu beobachten und auch mutig aufzuzeigen, wo, wann und in welcher Form durch IT-Konzerne im Verbund mit Machtpolitikern und radikalen Vertretern der Zivilgesellschaft die über Jahrhunderte mühsam erkämpften Grund- und Freiheitsrechte mit Füßen getreten und ausgehöhlt werden und andererseits dringend und rasche Wege zu finden, trotz Gesundheits-, Wirtschafts- und Politikkrise den Rechtsstaat zu bewahren und zu stärken. Ich danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you, Mr. Graaf. We now go to George Kadroukalos, who will be followed by Mr. Korlatian. Georgios, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first of all, my best wishes to you personally and to all our colleagues for a much better new year. I think, dear President, that we have, as our Assembly, showed good reflexes in the challenging environment of the pandemic. Not only we have adapted our functioning on the new difficult, dire circumstances, but we have also responded timely to the substantive challenges of the pandemic to our democratic values and principles. We have reacted to the new dangers regarding human rights, both with respect to political rights and individual freedoms, such as the right of personal movement, right of assembly, freedom of expression, but also to those that social rights are facing. We have insisted on the protection of vulnerable groups such as informal workers, women, LGBTQ plus people. Of course, the problems are far from being resolved. Quite the contrary, health and work conditions are still demanding, and social inequalities have not decreased, have been exploded during the pandemic. A lot of work for us in the months to come. Our response to challenges to democracy has been also prompt, including also monitoring of elections, as in Georgia, where we fully support the report prepared by Tini Cox and a post-electoral mission there. And we have reacted not only to the decline of parliamentary democracy in some of our countries in general, but also to the individual treatment of our citizens, especially political prisoners. This was the case with the political prisoners in Azerbaijan, where we had seen some positive evolution, but also regarding political prisoners in Turkey, where we have still to see a positive reaction on behalf of the Turkish state. The case of Demirtas, a member of the Turkish parliament, is emblematic. We should seek nothing less than full implementation of the decision of the court, so as Mr. Demirtas, one of many political prisoners in Turkey, be immediately released and return to his parliamentary duties. And this will be also a clear message to other member states which are too eager to arrest opponents instead of fully respecting rules of democracy and engage them into a fair public debate. We, Mr. President, our group, the group of United European Left, is going to actively support and promote the work of our Assembly in the fields of democracy and human rights, in parallel with the struggle of the people in our countries for a better and a more democratic future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now turn to Mr. Korlatian in the room. Titus, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, first of all, congratulations addressed to both rapporteurs for their work, their reports, and of course, conclusions and recommendations that I entirely share from the beginning. I will focus more on the elections in Georgia in my capacity as rapporteur on Georgia on behalf of the Monitoring Committee, together with our French colleague Claude Kern, the other co-rapporteur. These elections took place after an important legislative reform that addressed the electoral process, electoral system that was generated by an important constitutional reform that took place previously and based on an important debate within the Georgian parliament, dialogue, negotiations, sometimes quite complicated between power and the opposition within the Georgian parliament, and with the assistance and support of inter alia of the two co-rapporteurs of PACE, addressing the issue of commitments that were assumed previously by Georgia, specifically on the proportional system that is supposed to put it entirely into force in 2024 after this constitutional reform, but asking, and this was our constant position, to a first step already in 2020. That was happening, and this is why we welcomed the fact that these elections were taking place based on this reform. As mentioned by Tini Cox, the international observers, that means PACE observer mission, OSCE, ODIHR, and some other international observers concluded that these elections were generally, I quote, generally free, competitive, and overall fundamental freedoms being respected. In the same time, signaling, once again, I should underline the fact that there are still important shortcomings to be addressed. There were allegations of misconduct. I will not repeat everything that was mentioned by Tini Cox, but I will add specifically the issue of polarization. It's a concerning situation. During the years, we see this polarization, and we should encourage both forces, power and the opposition, to continue to work to diminish this polarization. Now, I will ask, and I will repeat the position of the rapporteurs, first of all, the government to seriously investigate allegations of misconduct and to address shortcomings based on recommendations of OSCE, ODIHR, PACE, the two rapporteurs, and of course the Venice Commission. To the opposition, I will renew our request based on our mandate that we received previously from the monitoring committee to be back in the parliament. The issue of polarization generated the refusal of the opposition to be part of this parliament. This is the right place to debate democratically to improve the situation. And my final comment in 10 seconds, if permitted, we intend as rapporteurs to go in Georgia in the next near future and to continue to work together with both power and the opposition to improve and to continue the reforms, avoiding the application of the mission and the role and competencies of the rapporteurs. Thank you.
Thank you. Because you were rapporteur, I left you a little bit more time, but please stick to the 3 minutes because otherwise we are taking away the opportunity of other people to be on board. The next one on the list is Sol Nemeth, who will be followed by Richard Buff. Remotely, Sol, you have the floor.
Dear Rick, congratulations to your re-election as the President of the Assembly. And I would like to express my gratitude to all of you colleagues as the new Vice President on behalf of Hungary, the incoming presidency of the Council of Europe from May this year. I would like to offer my cooperation to all of you. We had 1 year without a parliamentary assembly. And for this reason, I am really glad that finally we can meet again in a hybrid manner. So greetings to you, hybrid assembly, in the plenary and in your homes, hometowns as well. It was, I believe, the most serious challenge since the end of the Cold War, 89-90, we have experienced in the past 1 year. And it proved that international and inter-organizational cooperation is vital to manage such type of crises. And I would like to congratulate to our colleagues in the European Union, especially for being able to adopt the rescue package. And on our behalf, probably the most important was our resolution on the Athens Declaration on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly. Congratulations to you, President, for making it possible. The German EU presidency and the German Council of Europe presidency was, however, vital. And we were glad and privileged to have the German colleagues in both very important positions in the past period. And I believe that the Council of Europe itself was also successful in its online existence, including the creation of the voting possibility. It was needed, and now we are able to vote for our new officials. Congratulations to everybody, including the Secretariat. I would like to raise two issues which are minority related. One is the fact that the citizens' initiatives in the European Union, the so-called Minority Safe Pact, has been rejected by the European Commission. I think it is a very, very surprising development against the will of 1.2 million European citizens, against the overwhelming majority's decision of the European Parliament. The European Commission rejected to initiate legal measures. I think we need to investigate closely in our cooperation with the European Union how we can find appropriate remedies for this situation. And in general, the future of the citizens' initiatives in the European Union is questioned. This is the fifth citizens' initiative which is rejected by the European Union. Where the European Union is going to proceed. The other one is the Ukraine. I wrote to you a letter.
Time, 3 minutes is over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I wrote you the letter. I look forward to your active participation in finding solution for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move to Mr. Richard Buff remotely, who will be followed by Jacques Maire, who is in the room. Richard, you have the floor. I do not see Richard asking for the floor, so then I move immediately to Jacques Maire, who is pointing no. Okay, then we move on to Mr. Goncharenko, who is in the room. I've seen him because he sits behind me normally, who will be followed by Jette Christensen remotely. Take you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, dear chairman, you see that we had a voting on Russian delegation credentials recently, and I first would like to say thank you to everybody who supported the position of Ukrainian delegation and voted for challenging of the credentials of Russian delegation. And I want to address to those who didn't support this issue for the moment. Please think and understand one issue, that now it is the war in the world between Russian world and civilized world. During last year, what we have seen, Belarus. In Belarus, absolute violation of all human rights, killing of people who were protesting. And who helped Lukashenko to do this? It was Putin. Putin himself. Now we have a situation of hybrid Anschluss of Belarus by Russian Federation. When Russian officers of security working there, Russian propagandists, they call themselves journalists, but they are not, work there. Russian military forces are there. Russia controls their border between Belarus and Ukraine, for example. So that Belarus question is about Russia and what they are doing. With their support, the dictator Lukashenko is still on his place. Without support of Putin, he would be not anymore president of Belarus. So first of all, Живе Belarus. Georgia, still occupied territory by Russian Federation. And Abkhazia, South Ossetia, what has changed? Nothing. And again, I want to say words of support to our Georgian friends. Sakartvelo Galmarjos. But who is guilty? Putin. Ukraine. More than 13,000 people were killed from the beginning of Russian aggression. And this year they were killed again. And the war is not over. And who is making this war? Putin. Russian Federation inside. What do we see? Navalny case, again, chemical weapon in the 21st century. Killing of oppositioner by the government, by the president himself. He is killing those persons who are against him. First was Nemtsov, many names in Russian Federation. The last name is Alexei Navalny. And after he miraculously is alive, now he is detained to the prison. That's all. That's hundreds of people are beaten, thousands are arrested. That's what's going on in Russian Federation now. And Putin lives in this palace, unbelievable, for $1.5 billion near Gelendzhik. So this is the biggest thief and corruption in the world and the worst dictator in the world. So please support the challenging of Russian credentials, because this delegation, they are not delegates. They are just those who help Putin to kill and to make corruption in his own country.
Thank you. And now we move to Jette Christensen, who will be followed by Laima Andrikiene, both remotely. Jette, you have the floor. Jette is not asking for the floor. If she does later on, she will be given the floor. Then we move to, yes, she is. Jette, come on board.
Thank you very much. I will address the situation in many who ran for very few a real chance. The most important sign that we made was informal. Mr. Koch mentioned the pressure and dominance of the ruling party. This was also very much to be seen in the streets of Tbilisi before the election was finished. Before the election was finished, the ruling party was celebrating their victory, driving around the streets, represented by men in black. This is a very good illustration about how the pressure that we
Madam
Georgia. Many parties ran for election, and it really shows the Georgian people's wish to become a real and plural democracy where freedom of speech is central. Freedom of speech brings me to the question of information. One of the problems we observed in Georgia was that information was not shared. Saying that, I mean that Georgians have nowhere to go to find a common information platform, to find common truth and common news. That is a big problem, and I would call upon every Georgian politician to take responsibility for this, to change it, or else it is very difficult to create trust in democracy that the people of Georgia need and the politicians in Georgia need to lead them. Georgian people really want to live in a plural democracy. That was very clear to us. Nevertheless, the information problem and the financing of campaign is a very big obstacle to restore the trust in democracy that Georgia needs. The difference between party financing was severe, and that makes that the competition is not free and it's not open. Politicians, they get the media pluralism that they deserve. So it is the politicians' task to restore the trust in truth, the trust in media, and to give the Georgian people the democracy that they want to attend to and that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I recall to all of our colleagues who log in remotely to put their computer on floor, because otherwise we have a double sound. So on your screen, you have to put on floor when you speak. Next on my list is Leima Andrikiene, who will be followed by George Focus. Leima, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I will speak about the observation of the parliamentary elections in Georgia. First of all, I would like to thank our rapporteur, Tini Cox, for the draft report. Allow me to point out that in 2018, I was leading European Parliament election observation delegation to Georgia to observe presidential elections there. So I had a good opportunity to compare these two elections in the country concerned in the context of the OSCE ODIHR conclusions and recommendations from 2018 elections with the elections which took place in October-November last year and with the draft report of Mr. Cox. Allow me to be blunt. I cannot agree with the positive assessment of the 2020 elections. According to the local NGOs, which have been monitoring the elections in Georgia for many years, those were the worst elections in modern Georgian history and step back on its democratic development path. The likely result was a coalition government, the first one in Georgia's history. But something has gone very wrong on the night of the elections. Ballot stuffing and organized pressure on voters with the help of the criminal elements, marginalization of the representatives of the opposition parties in the electoral commissions, and finally, rewriting of the summary protocols by the Central Election Commission. Those were the tools deployed by the government to its advantage. As we know, all opposition parties have boycotted the election second round and have refused to take the seats in the parliament. The negotiation process, which has been ongoing for 2 months, now has been stalled since the government is refusing to move forward on any of the opposition's demands. All opposition MPs have written an appeal about resigning their seats, and within 10 days, next 10 days, the parliament will have to vote on this, and most likely they will end up with one-party parliament. There is no confidence in the election results in the society in Georgia. Georgia is in great peril as the polarization of the political spectrum and society is deepening. The only way to move forward is to return confidence in the election process. All this has to be reflected in the report we are debating today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now go to George Fox remotely. George, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And can I congratulate you on your re-election? And can I also say that you and the others who are in Strasbourg have a great advantage over us who are having to contribute remotely. And can I ask you if you would renew your requests to speakers and presidents of parliaments to try and facilitate the attendance of members at the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly because of its importance. Can I now refer to the speech, the rather jaundiced speech of my colleague from the United Kingdom, Ian Liddell-Granger. He queries the effectiveness of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, can I remind him that one of the ways in which we can be effective is for our national parliaments to follow up some of our recommendations, and particularly in relation to Russia, with the dreadful imprisonment and the way in which the brave leader of the opposition, Alexei Navalny, has been dealt with. When I raise this matter in Parliament in the United Kingdom, I point out that it is London which is the center of the activity of the oligarchs surrounding Putin, their investments, their acquisition of property. And we need to take stronger action in relation to their activities. You know, it's even quite astonishing that our Prime Minister has nominated the son of a former KGB agent to be a member of our Parliament in the House of Lords. That kind of action does not send the right kind of message and the right kind of support to our Assembly. Can I also say that I'm really concerned about arrests in Belarus, and I think we need to take stronger action in relation to Belarus. I'm in particularly concerned about people who have been in prison, and I've taken part in a very good initiative that is taking place around Europe to adopt a prisoner, and I've adopted Stepan Latipov. There is the message that I've put out, and I hope that members of the Parliamentary Assembly will follow the requests to adopt prisoners in Belarus, and I've sent a message of support to him through organizations involved and also directly. And finally, can I say, in relation to Georgia, I hope that all of us in the Council of Europe, in the Parliamentary Assembly and our national parliaments, will support the initiative enabled by the European Union and the United States ambassador to try and find a solution. That, I think, is the positive way forward to encourage the opposition to take part in the transformation in Georgia. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, George. We now turn to Ruben Rubinyan, who will be followed by Ahmed Yildiz. Ruben, you have the floor. Within the hemicycle.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, during the time of global pandemic on September 27, 2020, supported by Turkey, Azerbaijan launched large-scale military actions against the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. This offensive was accompanied by deliberate targeting and indiscriminate shelling of civilian settlements and infrastructures, churches, objects of cultural heritage with a wide range of weapons, including banned weaponry such as cluster bombs and weapons containing white phosphorus. This aggression resulted in a 44-day full-scale war. The people of Nagorno-Karabakh were attacked not only by the Azeri armed forces, but also mercenaries and foreign terrorist fighters deployed by Turkey to the conflict zone from the Middle East. This fact has been reported by the leaders and state security agencies of France, Russia, and the United States, international media, human rights watchdogs. This war saw most vicious war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Azerbaijani armed forces and their terrorist allies. Numerous photos and videos have been released from Azerbaijani social media sources illustrating violence and ill treatment towards the Armenian prisoners of war and their executions, brutal beheadings, and mutilations of corpses. The captured foreign terrorist fighters confessed that they were deployed from the Turkish-occupied northern Syria to kill Armenian infidels, and that they were promised an additional sum for each beheading. These war crimes are the logical continuation of the hate policy against ethnic Armenians that bears systemic nature in Azerbaijan. Today, after the military hostilities have stopped, the most urgent humanitarian issue is the release and repatriation of the Armenian prisoners of war captured by Azerbaijan. The trilateral statement that stopped the hostilities, inter alia, requires the exchange of all the prisoners of war, hostages, and other detained persons and bodies of the dead. After the initial round of exchange of prisoners, hostages, and other detained persons, however, which should have happened on the agreed all-for-all principles, Azerbaijan has been refusing to complete the process under various pretexts, and up to this date refuses to grant the International Committee of Red Cross access to all persons protected by the 1949 Geneva Conventions. Furthermore, 1 month after the trilateral statement entered into force, Azerbaijan launched a new military aggression in the Hadrut region of Nagorno-Karabakh and captured additional prisoners of war. The Azerbaijani side immediately announced the beginning of criminal prosecution against the newly captured, not recognizing them as prisoners of war. Colleagues, Azerbaijan is not getting ready for a peaceful coexistence with Armenians and continues to pose a direct genocidal threat to physical security of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. Under these circumstances, we must make sure that the peace process resumes within the framework of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship. The further political solution to the status of Nagorno-Karabakh on the basis of self-determination is vital for the whole region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. We now go to Ahmed Yildiz, who will be followed by Rafael Husseinov. Ahmed, you have the floor within the room.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the latest Georgian elections held in the aftermath of substantial legal reforms adopted after a compromise following a year-long and inclusive consultation process between the ruling party and the opposition were of great importance for Georgia in its democratic consolidation. I would like to recall that the statement of preliminary findings of the election observation mission, which was a joint endeavor of parliamentarians from PACE, NATOPA, and OSCE-PA, noted the fact that the legislative amendments which provided a sound basis for holding democratic elections were addressing many of the Council of Europe recommendations. As acknowledged by international observers, the elections were competitive. Fundamental freedoms were generally respected and most electoral procedures were followed. Georgian voters expressed their will at the polls and once again demonstrated their strong commitment to democracy. It was particularly impressive to see so many of them coming to voting stations despite the COVID-19. On any negative vote, we can regret that the elections could not take place in the Georgian territories of South Ossetia and Abkhazia for obvious reasons. Democracy, freedom, and rule of law among the shared values at the foundation of our organization. Member states should therefore be committed to supporting democratic improvement in Georgia, a country which has made clear its aspiration to Euro-Atlantic integration. Meeting the highest democratic standards is a requirement to progress toward this goal. With regard to protests against the results of the elections and clashes with the police, I would like to call on all political stakeholders to act with restraint and responsibility and to engage constructively in the adoption and implementation of additional reforms. Such efforts are of course, important for Georgian progress on its pathway toward a more democratic political system. Dear colleagues, I regret that Armenian delegation still continues the path they followed in the last 3 decades. I urge them to adopt a new approach, to be in close contact with Azerbaijan, to leave this issue behind in line with the international law and UN Security Council resolutions. Thank you for the good of the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. We will now move to Rafael Husseinov, and I inform the colleagues that this is the last speaker on the list due to time constraints. Rafael, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, dear colleagues. Today is a historic day in many respects. Above all, this is a historic day because after a sad break in the year, we are finally together in Strasbourg again and gathered again in this hall, which is native to us. The main thing that makes this day historic for me and the Azerbaijani delegation is the event that happened here exactly 20 years ago. On January 25, 2001, the flag of Azerbaijan was added to the list of flags in front of the building of the Council of Europe, and as equal members of this prestigious organization, we start our journey. Today's Azerbaijan is very different from the Azerbaijan of that time. At that time, our restored independence that was advancing by overcoming difficulties was 9 years old. This year, we will celebrate the 30th anniversary of the independence of our strong and developed state that is moving forward tomorrow with confidence. Over the past years, Azerbaijan has made great strides in strengthening the rule of law, human rights, and creating democratic institutions in the country. In all these, the invaluable lessons of the Council of Europe family and the path we have traveled together occupy a special place. When Azerbaijan joined the Council of Europe 20 years ago, it was a country with 20% of occupied territory and with 1 million refugees and internally displaced persons. Today, Azerbaijan can proudly declare that it is a victorious state that liberated its lands from the enemy. In addition, Azerbaijan achieved this without anyone's help due to the many years of experience and the growing strength. Azerbaijan solves the problem perceived as Gordian knot by the Council of Europe, OSCE, and UN. In doing so, it saved itself and, in fact, carried out the work of these international organizations, thus making the burden of them. This is my answer to Mr. Rabinyan's full of slander and lie speech. Azerbaijan starts the new year with deep confidence, solving its most difficult problem. I wish the Council of Europe to get rid of the problems accumulated over the years and embark on a new, more successful path. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've seen that in the list of speakers, we were not able, since they appointed themselves a bit late, to the issue on the Georgian elections being addressed by any Georgian colleague. So I will make an exception in giving the floor to the head of the Georgian delegation for 3 minutes, and that is the last speaker for today. Mr. Kuchera.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you and the members of the Passive Observation Delegation for visiting Georgia to observe the parliamentary elections amid the unusual and challenging circumstances. We much appreciate your support of the democratic process in Georgia. The recent elections have been extraordinary due to the COVID pandemic. The governments across the world had to adapt to the new reality of increased health risks without putting democracy on hold. The Georgian government spared no efforts in order for the elections to be in compliance with the international health standards and recommendations, including ensuring the necessary sanitary measures at the polling stations, as well as adjusting the existing legislation for those in quarantine and self-isolation to be able to cast their votes. In total, 127 special stations with the mobile ballot boxes were established for that reason. We welcome the largely positive international assessments further shared by the international community, which clearly states that 31st October parliamentary elections were competitive and overall fundamental freedoms were respected. Nevertheless, a number of shortcomings have been identified. We very much value Mr. Cox's report and stand ready to adequately react to the deficiencies observed by the mission, among those special attention paid to the issue of campaign financing, which has been a subject of interest to PASE and international monitors since the presidential elections 2018. The engagement of our international partners in this process carries a great importance, and we look forward to receiving the particular recommendations from you. It is also very important that the opposition political parties participate in this process. Our international partners continue to call on Georgian opposition to enter the parliament. We remain hopeful that the opposition representatives, which will take up their mandates granted to them by 800,000 voters, and shift to the democratic process from streets to the parliament, because up to the date, there is not a single piece of evidence of any ground based on which the election results may be questioned. I've heard a number of concerns raised during our speeches made by the speakers. I can assure you that unfortunately, 21st century, sometimes we become the victims of disinformation. And we've seen some of them right online. First of all, there have been not a single arrest of any candidate, especially 2 weeks before, but in general, there is not a single case that can be counted.
local NGOs making the statement in regard being one of the worst elections, it has to be also mentioned that exactly 1.5 months later, they made an official statement saying that they've made a mistake, which was related to PVT, parallel voting tabulations, and admitted the error, which was the main reason for making this big noise and the street actions. So it has to be mentioned at the same time. They've made their point to this regard. Local self-governance elections are to be held in 2021 in Georgia, and our political party is committed to work, and I'm finishing, with all interested parties to make sure that the recommendations are considered and changes are introduced in the legislation, and the standards for election administration process are improved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now come to the end of the debate with just one element, potentially more. Does the rapporteur, Mr. Ian Little-Granger, wish to have the floor? I am looking. I see Ian. I inform our colleagues that in any case, those who were not able to have their intervention done, that you can basically have your speech sent to the table office for publication in the official report. Now, it is important, colleagues, that the text to be submitted should be in typescript electronically if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I now give the floor to Ian Little-Granger to finish up the debate. Ian, you've got the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Can I just congratulate and thank all colleagues for their contribution? But I think the main things to take out of this, Mr. President, is obviously COVID-19, which so many speakers brought forward. The democracy, the openness, the not abuse of power, but having to be done. I give one example very simply for you at the moment, is that the French have a curfew. Is it necessary? Yes, it probably is. Should it continue the moment any longer than it has to? No, it shouldn't. And I think that goes for the whole of Europe, including my own country, and right across our member states. The second one is Georgia. I listened keenly to what Tini Cox has said, but also keenly to all the speakers, and about a third of the speakers brought up the situation in Georgia, and both sides of the argument. But there is obviously a situation, and I'm grateful for people not pushing for a vote when we had that they could have done so, because I think this needs to be talked through and sorted out. Can I come on to the situation in Russia? Members brought this up as well, again on both sides. I would urge Russia to please, let's start talking without causing problems. And I would urge possibly the president and the members of the presidential and the member of the Court of Human Rights with the Secretary General to go to Russia to talk to them and see what we can do. And finally, on the situation in Armenia and in Azerbaijan, this is obviously a desperately difficult situation. One of the fundamental rights of being a soldier, if you are captured, you expect to be repatriated to your country as soon as possible when hostilities end. And again, I think it's important that both sides recognize this. And where there are prisoners who may or not be wounded, they are sent to their countries to be looked after. But if they are in captivity, and both countries are members of the, have signed the convention, the Geneva Convention, they should be looked after, fed, medical attention, and being part of, dare I say, as a guest, as opposed to anything else. And therefore no slave labor, no other workings. Can I just say, on a general note, there were lots of comments about the future of the Council of Europe. I made my position clear because I feel strongly that we need to have our responsibilities changed slightly to make sure that we are part of the solutions and never part of the problem. The great thing about international organizations, they should always strive to listen to everybody, take the concerns of the people they represent and try to make them relevant to the situations that unfold, be they whatever. And that, I think, is the most important thing that we can do. But the progress of the Council of Europe, I think next year will be the crucial year. Last year's been a write-off. Next year will be crucial because we must establish our rights. And that is going to be the return of democracy, the return of free speech, and the return of the citizens' rights. Therefore, Mr. President, I thank everybody. I thank you. I've been delighted to present the progress report. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much for the report. Since you referred to me concerning Russia, I can inform you that you know that I was there in December. We had to return because of the COVID. We had the agreement that rapporteurs could go, but given the situation that has not been possible until now, but it is my intention to head out, address all these issues, if possible, even still in the month of February, but we'll see. This being said, we now go to the continuation of this progress report, more in particular to the reference to committees. The Bureau has proposed a number of references to committees for ratification by the Assembly. They are set out in document 15213 and addendum 1 and 2. Is there any remark or objection to this? I don't see any, then they are approved. Then we move on to the other decisions in the progress report, which is also the same document 15213 and addendum 1 and 2. Need to be ratified. Is there any objections or remark? No. Then they are approved. Before ending the session, I have a request from Mr. Lubinets from the Ukraine, who is in the hemicycle, and apparently there was a problem with the voting system. In a few seconds, Mr. Lubinets.
Challenge of the accreditation of Russian delegations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lubinets. Well, dear colleagues, it is 1:32. That was okay. Again, sorry for those who could not intervene, but this will happen again in the next day since we got many people wanting to intervene, which is very positive. Now, the Assembly will hold its next sitting this afternoon at 4 p.m. with the agenda which was approved this morning. The sitting is adjourned.